According to market mix modeling, audio ads are 3.5 times more effective if they use stats, like 3.5 times.
Market mix modelling knows that everything is measurable. Right now, we are tracking your pupil dilation, galvanic skin response, and general levels of arousal, and determining the effectiveness of this ad.
Or if you want to get serious about measuring effectiveness, talk to Mutinex. They're the world's leading SaaS provider of market mix modeling. Marketers, think of it as a growth co-pilot. Mutinex, make better decisions.
90% of the best ideas come out of hard graft. The best ideas, the best solutions to things do not come when you're going for a walk through the park and suddenly it hits you, oh, I should do this, or oh, this is the solution. It comes from actually doing the thing. That's where you come up with solutions. If you want to write a better book, it's much better to just keep writing that book, put in the hours. And then when you read like all of these, Stephen King on writing, for example, you realize that these writers know all of this already. They do all of these things because there's no other way to do it. You can't write a book by walking through parks constantly and have the occasional idea which you write down as a line and then eventually you'll have a book. It requires hard graft.
G'day, Adam.
Brent?
Now, mate, as well as being a agency founder,
Yep.
you also call yourself a consumer psychologist.
I am a consumer psychologist. So, and are you going to ask me what a psychologist is? What?
Sorry.
So, Brent, I am a consumer psychologist. I don't call
are.
myself a consumer psychologist. I am a consumer psychologist. So, to be a psychologist, you have to be registered with APRA. It's something I pay my $600 a year and have done for many, many years to be. And it shits me because in the world of marketing, everyone has studied psychology and everyone says, oh yeah, I've studied psychology. And there's a huge difference between...
Big difference between consumer psychology and being a consumer psychologist.
That's right. Anyone can study psychology.
Yes.
But to be a psychologist, you need to be registered.
So I know it shits you, but how would you feel if I said that today we're going to talk to someone who claims to have the only dedicated consumer psychology podcast?
Well, I know who we're talking about, and so I love this person. But I have to be honest, calling it a consumer psychology podcast does shit me a little bit.
But that's what it is, right? Like it talks about behavioural science, it talks about consumer psychology. I mean, it sort of says what it is on the tin.
Sailing close to the wind, and but I forgive him because he's so brilliant. So his name's Phill Agnew.
Yes.
The podcast you're talking about is called Nudge.
Correct.
I love it. He's amazing.
Yes, and he might have the only dedicated consumer psychology podcast, but I've got a dedicated consumer psychologist. So
don't you forget it.
Black t-shirts for the win. Anyway, excited to have Phill Agnew on, and we're going to welcome him now to the show. G'day, Phill. Welcome to Black T-shirts. Phill Agnew, are you wearing a black t-shirt?
It's so close to being black. It's the blackest one I have right now. I mean, on this, like anyone who is watching video, for all intents and purposes, it's black.
It
This is a
looks pretty
podcast. I can say what I want.
You can.
I'm wearing a black
Theatre of the mind.
t-shirt, a black bandana, and a black hat, obviously.
Very, very cool.
Well, and is a black t-shirt, is that usually part of your wardrobe? And is that something you think, as a, someone who's all about behavioural science, is that something you think much about, Phill, what you wear?
I mean, unfortunately, the only fashion advice a behavioural scientist will give you is to wear red sneakers.
Why is that?
Well, the idea is if you wear red sneakers, this was an infamous study at a conference where Francesca Gino, the researcher, looked at people coming into a conference and saw people who were dressed weirdly, i.e. those who would wear red sneakers at a conference where everyone wears suits. And she would then get the amount of citations they had. This was a scientific conference, and she realized that people who dressed weirdly had more citations than those who dressed in conformity. So those who break the norms dress weirdly. But, and it sounds wonderful, doesn't it? But this is the problem with science, behavioural science. Although that study has not been redacted, an awful lot of Francesca Gino's work has been. So don't listen to that advice. Don't go around wearing red sneakers at your next conference.
Do you have anything on black t-shirts? Is there any studies on black t-shirts?
None that I know of, mate. But they're probably there probably is. Just wait till the scientists get their hands on that. Gee.
So apparently, just in the vein of superficial things kind of implying a whole lot of things they probably don't, apparently swearing more in meetings makes you more intelligent. Eating in meetings makes you appear more intelligent and confident. Speaking with an accent other than where you're from is more intelligent. And a beard also makes you seem
clearly
seem more intelligent. In the world of as you say, in the world of behavioural sciences, anything can be proven for or supported with evidence to get something published. Is it a massive issue, or do you not give a shit?
Yeah, it is a massive issue. The replication crisis is a massive issue. The fraud is the biggest issue. So there are researchers in the behavioural science space who have been done for fraud. Fraud is in like they have manipulated data to get the result they want, not by just p-hacking, which is testing 100 different variables and then eventually finding one that the data suggests has an impact, for actually creating data. So Francesca Gino is the main one at the moment. Some of Dan Ariely's stuff is being called into question, specifically his study on the signing at the top or bottom of a form. The idea here was that if you sign at the top of a form, you are primed to think about honesty, and you're then more likely to be honest in that form versus signing at the bottom. Obviously, everyone typically signs at the bottom, so it was a pretty interesting, controversial study. It was done apparently in a real world with actual insurance data from a insurance company who actually got their customers to either sign at the top or the bottom, and then they measured their honesty. The results were really interesting, suggested, that if you sign at the top, you're more honest, but the data was clearly manipulated. And so that's very problematic. That's the big issue, I think. The fraud is the big issue. The fact that science can prove, this is Rory Sutherland's, what he would say, the opposite of a good idea can still be a good idea. Having a beard in a meeting can make you seem more intelligent. Also, being cleanly shaven in a very sharp suit can probably do the same thing. It doesn't necessarily mean that neither of those things are true. What it probably means is that it's in contrast to your surroundings. So you'll seem more intelligent at a meeting, potentially, or you will at least seem more stand out if you do stand out from your surroundings. If you have
not in present company. Dan Ariely doing that study is pretty interesting because he became a founding member of Lemonade, which was a kind of a breakthrough insurance company. And they built their whole early model on behavioural sciences. And I'm wondering how much of his work has not been fraudulent or stood the test of time.
Well, I imagine the majority, because the good thing that's happening in behavioural science at the moment is because of these scandals, there's a lot of people who are desperate to prove that there's more fraud and desperate to prove that there's more. Every YouTube influencer, every YouTube influencer investigator is out to try and analyse this data. All of these PhD students in the world of behavioural science are desperate to catch people committing data fraud, and Dan Ariely would be the obvious target, right? Because he has worked closely with a researcher who has been suspended from Harvard for data fraud, but they don't seem to be finding anything else at the moment. There's a fantastic blog called Data Colada, which is set up by 3 researchers who not only research this stuff themselves, but are sort of now a bit of a face for whistleblowers, so people can come to them and share information that they can then make public. And this stuff isn't coming up yet. So although, and I feel, Dan Ariely is still a bit of a personal hero of mine. I really do love his book, Predictably Irrational. I do think a lot of his work is very interesting. Some of his studies on anchoring are pretty fascinating, and they have been replicated, or at least his ideas have been replicated in other ways. So
occasionally he's gone a bit dodgy, but that doesn't mean the whole body of work is discredited. So speaking of fraud, what are you? Are you a psychologist? Are you a behavioural scientist? Or are you a podcaster? There could be more polite ways to ask.
Speaking of fraud, is the intro.
Fraud.
Yeah.
What are you?
No. What are you? What are your? Are you? Yeah. How do you describe yourself in this world?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know, Adam. I'm a marketer by trade. I've spent the last decade in marketing, mainly working in software marketing. And then as a product marketer, I quit that over a year ago to go full-time on the podcast that I run called Nudge. I've been running Nudge for 6 years. Had some wonderful guests like yourself on the show, Adam. And
did you say wonderful guests and Adam? Is that what you said?
Yeah.
200 wonderful guests and then one Adam.
So do you identify yourself as a podcaster, and that's your profession? Or that's
I think
kind
I'm
of
going for a bit of an identity crisis, to be honest. I've got no idea. The podcast is the main thing I do. I also publish the shows on YouTube. I'm running a training course. I do a bit of consultancy. Yeah, I don't know.
And the reason why I asked the question is the purpose of our show is to kind of look at creativity and the creative process. And I'm wondering how you identify yourself. And I'm going to put you broadly in the bucket of you're a behavioural sciencey type person, and that's kind of, and you're good at communicating what you know to the world. Are you also really creative?
I think the only reason I wanted to do the podcast full time, really, because podcasting doesn't have the paycheck it should have. I think it's underpaid for the amount of influence.
That's true, Adam.
yeah.
It does not have a paycheck at all.
We agree.
Agree with that. Yep. I think it is heavily undervalued for the amount of influence it can have on listeners, especially repeat listeners. The reason I wanted to do it full time is because I loved the creative element of creating a show. There's something wonderful about creating a podcast, which is it allows you to really feel that element of creativity. So especially on my show, which are heavily edited, narrative-based discussion, where I craft the story behind the episodes. So I've just done one with a memory researcher in the US who was telling me the story about the satanic panic and all of the science behind how people ended up believing false memories, a lot of Elizabeth Loftus's studies. And that could be quite a dull episode where we just go study to study to study. But I weaved in this, I thought, or I hope, quite interesting story about this individual called Michelle Smith, who started the satanic panic. She believed that she recovered these false memories from her being 5 years old in satanic cults and started this panic where the majority of Americans sincerely believed that there was over 10,000 or even 100,000 Satanists within their own city. And these are cities all across America, and led to all these amazing things. And there's all these wonderful clips of news reporters in the 80s saying, "Oh, this just in, satanic panic has hit Philadelphia." And it's just like this incredible part of history, which I had no idea about. And it's obviously based on some elements of psychology and behavioural science, which I then go to talk about. So anyway, it's a long-winded way of me saying I love that creative element, and the podcasting allows you to do that, because podcasting is, you can be creative without having to sink hours and hours of work into something. It's not video, it's not documentary, it's not something which has to be very, very high quality. It has to be audio high quality, but that's just one medium. And I think that allows you to get real creative fulfillment without having to sink a month into a project.
And I think I see in you a bit of a kindred spirit to myself. So I studied psychology, and then becoming a psychologist, being a psychologist, they're so keen to practice a scientist practitioner model and prove themselves as a science. It just beats the living shit out of any creativity you have in you. And so to be interested in behavioural sciences and nudges and nudge theory and consumer behaviour, whilst having a creative kind of lens on all of that, I think is a really powerful combination that you don't see that often. It's either sciencey, nerdy type or creative, bullshitty type. But getting those two things to combine is kind of fun. Yeah,
I like that, Adam. And I think we have to be really wary of the people in behavioural science space, marketing space, creativity space that say it's what do you call it? Colouring by numbers. You know, This is not how you become successful. There is not a silver bullet, and it's really common. Especially, it's tempting on my show to say, oh, if you just do this one thing, you'll be able to write a successful blog title, or you'll be able to negotiate better with your boss and get a pay rise. It's never as simple as that. There's always complexity. In fact, the things you can probably prove in a study are not the things that actually would have the biggest effect. The things that would have a biggest effect is an incredibly, like, if you went and studied Steve Jobs, you wouldn't be able to say that he's an incredibly effective person if you just tried to study everything he did, because it's so random and out there and crazy.
But even so, like, I take what you're saying, you can't just, it's not coloured by numbers, you can't just apply the behavioural science and that's it, job done. But that said, do you think, though, we still don't use it enough in the world of marketing, and particularly in the creative side of marketing?
Yeah, I think in marketing we jump onto the next big thing. So when I started as a marketer back in 2014, 2013, it was data. Everything had to be data driven. I remember I was a community manager at a software company. I was told I was writing the blogs. We were doing inbound based marketing, classic 2013 marketing strategy. Let's just get people in by writing blogs. Doesn't work anymore. But anyway, that was what we were doing back then. And they said, you need to be data driven with your blogs. So we analysed all of the data of all of our blogs and spewed out what the best blog would be. It would be a listicle, because they always got the most clicks. It would have a picture of somebody, a famous person in the blog header, be short, be about, I think it was 800 words. The data said this is how to write the best blog. The data revealed it. Wrote that blog, published that blog, the worst performing blog of the month. Obviously, the data doesn't reveal everything. It just shows you, it gives some idea of what direction to go. Now we're being told that AI is the solution to everything. That the solution now is not just data, it's get AI, put in the right prompt and you'll have the best marketing. And I think in 10 years, there'll be something else we're jumping onto. Maybe it's AI agents or some, I don't know, next thing along that train. What I push marketers to do is, be aware of these trends. But at the end of the day, you are deeply trying to influence somebody's decisions. You're trying to change the way a person makes a decision as a marketer. If you are trying to change someone's decisions, you should learn how people make decisions. And the study of how people make decisions is behavioral science and psychology. And so you should study these principles, because then when you're trying to influence people, at least you understand the frameworks in which they're making those decisions. I feel like marketers who don't try and learn behavioral science is a bit like a lawyer not learning UK law, or a doctor not learning anything about bones
Anatomy.
or DNA or something. Anatomy. You're missing such a crucial element of the job, is how I'd frame it.
One of the people in our agency has created a chat. What do you call a chat bot on ChatGPT? A chat bot.
Yep.
And it says it gives you the 3 behavioural sciences principles to any form of behaviour change. So if you want to say, why does Phill drink from a water bottle during a podcast interview, it'll give you the 3 behavioural principles as to why you do that, or why do people honk their horn when somebody, whatever it is. And so I don't know if you need to, do you need to learn it, or do you just need to?
And how do you use that, I think about?
It can be either used to uncover an insight, to get an idea, so a contextually relevant idea, or it can be used to post-rationalise a journey. So it can be used before you have an idea or post it, but it's not in widespread use at the moment. But it's just an interesting way of saying all of the behavioural sciences that Phill knows and all of your guests know, they can all be pulled up at the touch of a button. Does that change anything?
What scares me? Have you guys read Coming Wave by
I don't know what to do with that, and Phill certainly doesn't know what to do with that.
It reminds me. It is. I think it's an important thing. Basically, what scares me, the day when marketing dies, is when Suleiman in Coming Wave talks about this second Turing test. And this second Turing test is when you give AI a prompt which says, go and make £1 million or dollars on Amazon without any human interventions, and it's able to do it. It's able to send emails to the dropshipper in China. It's able to analyze all of the product pages on Amazon to find the most persuasive ways to get people to buy. It's able to tweak the pricing strategy so it beats every other product on there. It's able to fulfill shipments through Amazon fulfillment. So it does everything, and then suddenly you've got an AI creating $1 million on Amazon. That, I think, is when I will be really scared of AI.
But can the AI create a brand ad that creates future demand for people who don't even know they want that thing on Amazon yet? So I'm quite interested to ask this, Phill, right? Like, I think obviously in the world of performance marketing, the idea of nudging and the idea of sort of, being able to convert people's behavior is very easy to apply. You can A/B test it, you can optimize it, very easy to apply. How do you think about brand advertising in a behavioral science framework?
Yeah, it fits, I think, very nicely. I actually think as if you learn about behavioral science, you don't get drawn towards this idea that programmatic, quick advertising is the solution. You actually get drawn towards this idea that very long-term brand messaging is more effective. This is essentially the idea, the principle that the scientists would give this is called mere exposure. And this is the idea that the more you see something, the more you become aware of something, not only the more you'll recall it, which is kind of obvious. Everybody knows that if you listen to this podcast 7 times, you'll be more likely to tell your mate about it than if you listen to it once. What's really interesting is the more you see something, the more you like it. And that's independent of of your preferences, really. So the study is by, I think it's Paul Zion. I'm not. I'd have to double check that, but it's a study in the 60s in an American Midwestern university, and these students were shown Turkish words in one variant of the study and Chinese characters in another variant of the study. And these Americans had never seen Turkish words or Chinese characters. Not to do a discredit to those Americans, just it wasn't something they were aware of. So they had never been exposed to them. So say you were exposed to a Mandarin character once, and then you were asked, do you think that's like an attractive looking, I can't remember the exact term he used, but do you like the look of that character? Showed them to some students. But then one Chinese character he showed repeatedly. He showed 7 times. It came up 7 times in the test. Did it the same with Turkish words. One word he showed repeatedly. But before he showed them repeatedly, there was no preference for any particular word. After he showed one repeatedly, even though they weren't consciously aware that they were seeing that word multiple times, they grew a preference for it. So people grew preferences for things that they saw repeatedly. In a very weird version of this study, they had 3 different females attend, again, studies in the 60s that shouldn't be repeated today. 3 different females attend a lecture in one of their classes. One of the females attended just once. They were instructed to not talk to anyone as well. So they sat, didn't talk to anyone. One attended just once and left. One attended 5 times and left. One attended 20 times and left. So throughout the year. They all had similar levels of attractiveness, apparently. And then at the end of the semester, they were asked to rate, the people who were in the seminar were asked to rate the attractiveness of these females. The one they'd seen 20 times was rated as most attractive, but wasn't by an independent group. So people develop this preference for things that we see multiple times. So dating advice, just be seen by the person you want to date 20 times, and I think that's enough. Anyway, this is a long-winded way of saying there is evidence to suggest that brands get a lot of value out of sharing the same message to the same audience multiple times. We think, because of the world of programmatic marketing, that it's inefficient to show the same ad to someone 7 times. We are told
that's wastage.
Wasted. Yeah, you should reach a higher number of people. You should reach a bigger audience and get more ROI for your money, because you can 1,000 eyeballs is better than 100. But this science, these studies would disagree. They would say, no, reach 100 eyeballs 10 times. And you'll be more effective.
I think the general point of your answer is, as well, is that behavioural sciences isn't just about, despite the name of your podcast, isn't just about nudging people in the moment to purchase. It's about understanding how we make decisions, how the brain works, and with that information, you can plan for the long term or plan for the short term.
Of course, I just think it's easier to apply in some of those performance marketing use cases, right?
It's more tangible. It's more tangible and more immediate, but not necessarily more useful. Brent, you know the reason why I'd make a crap CMO?
Risk and compliance meetings.
Apart from that, it's really, really complicated, and it can also be incredibly slow and tough. For example, how do you decide how much money to put into brand spending?
Yeah, it's a big decision. And I think we've seen a lot of marketers be really addicted to the drug of performance marketing, which gives you an immediate payback. But I think you really want to be understanding the long-term benefits of brand. You need to measure that over time, and you need to also understand that if you start trading off, spending more on brand, less on performance, you need to know straight away, is that working? Is it delivering? And so you need some sort of model to do that. Without a model, I don't know how you'd even start.
Such as what?
Well, Mutinex. It's the best one out there. It's the best one out there, man. It's SaaS-based. It's really one of the most cutting-edge marketing mix models you can get. And if you have got hard questions that you're trying to confront as a marketer, I would thoroughly recommend a tool like Mutinex.
They're also the sponsor of this show, right?
Yes.
Excellent. Your podcast is great. And just coming back to your creativity, and our podcast is about the creative process, basically, and applied in a commercial setting. What I like about your podcast is you constantly try to apply the principles that you're learning from your guests on your own podcast. So you're applying creativity and thinking of your own experiments, that you take the learnings from your guests and you apply them to your podcast. It kind of reminds me a little bit of like gonzo journalism, where you are the subject of the things you're learning about. So kind of a whole Hunter S. Thompson kind of thing applied to podcasting. So it's kind of like gonzo podcasting, where you become the subject of the things you're learning. How dedicated are you to that? How hard is it to think of all those experiments to apply on yourself? And how do you do it?
I'm not quite fear and loathing dedicated just yet. I would like to get there. But I think one of the problems you face with gurus in the business world is that they preach these ideas, these principles, and then they don't really show what that actually involves. So the cliche one is 5 a.m. gym by 6, ice cold shower at 6:30, green smoothie at 6:45, and then smash a merger and acquisition before lunch. But like no one actually says what that means. And I think this is especially true in the behavioral science space, where it's very easy for people to say, let's use an example, handwritten notes are more effective than sending an email. That's very easy for someone to say. It's much harder for someone to say, I sent 100 handwritten notes and 100 emails. Here's what worked better for me. The reason I like the latter is what you do when you apply some of these principles is you learn that it might sound easy in principle, but actually writing a handwritten note, which I did do for 20 listeners, and I compared it with sending 20 emails. Writing actually 20 handwritten notes takes a ton of time. You realize this might not be the most effective, even if it is, and it did. The test I did, I asked people to leave reviews of the show. When I wrote the handwritten note, I think about 48% of the people who read that note left a review, whereas only 10% who received the email left a review. So it did work, but I can't do that consistently. You can't just write handwritten notes for everyone. So I think when you apply this stuff yourself and you share those learnings with your audience, you gain a bit of trust. I also think, and Adam, this is one of the things that you and I have debated in the past. I think people value creativity or creative pursuits when they can see that lots of effort has gone into it. And I think my listeners, when they listen to a show and they can really tell that Phill has spent time studying this or working on this or researching this or done some silly experiment to at least test it, even though it's not scientific, I think they value that, and I think they'll be more likely to enjoy the show because of it. And so I think there is a effort can equal enjoyment.
I think that's so true for advertising. I think that people can totally tell the difference between something that's being cared for, highly crafted, versus something that hasn't. And I think it creates a completely different impression of the brand. I think it really helps if you want to be premium. I couldn't agree more. People, they might not be able to articulate it, but they can feel it, right? They can really feel the difference.
Yeah, that's right. And they feel a sense of care and effort's gone into this, so therefore the companies
must care.
It's like a little window into the soul of the business.
But also on your podcast, we had John Evans on our pod as well. So whose podcast is bigger, Phill, yours or John's?
Well, John would say his, but I would say mine. I mean, I class Nudge as the number one marketing podcast in the UK, and John classes Uncensored CMO as the number one marketing podcast in the UK. I've been around for longer, definitely have more downloads and bigger YouTube following. What more do you want?
You've got him.
All the experiments you've learnt, just give us one thing you would always do to make sure you get listeners, and one or two things you would never do. So what you've learnt to never do.
Yeah, one of the things that you learn very quickly when playing the content game online is that curiosity is one of the biggest motivators in terms of driving listeners. So this is the idea. I mean, we all know about curiosity. It's this idea of when we're curious about something, we're far more likely to click on something and learn about something. And the best content online, especially in YouTube and podcasts, but also in newsletters, posts on social media, they inspire a bit of curiosity. They have a hook which gets you interested, little nuggets of information along the way to keep you wanting to learn more, and then a final payoff at the end. That is always more effective than explaining the whole story at the start. If you just look at any Netflix documentary, these things make you want to watch more. So yeah, I think like this episode will do better if we can give it a title where people feel like they are learning a little bit, but they don't have the complete answer. There are cliche ways of doing that, and there are really effective ways of doing that. But don't think that this is clickbait. Don't think that this is what BuzzFeed do, and I'm above that, because this is what every single successful author, Shakespeare's plays are written with curiosity in mind. He doesn't reveal everything about. He doesn't reveal that Romeo and Juliet will be a disastrous relationship in the first scene, and then Romeo will end up killing himself. He reveals that much later on because it makes for a much better story. And I think this is something that creators and especially podcasters need to know as well.
Phill, something you've learnt to not do?
Unfortunately, I really like getting actual researchers on the show because I love asking them about their studies and learning about how they've set up the study and getting quite detailed into the weeds of it, because I find that very interesting, and that allows me and the listeners to really deeply understand the paper we're talking about rather than just giving the sort of snippet, which is what most people share. But those shows don't tend to do so well. I think that's just because researchers in general aren't the best public speakers. You need to find a balance on podcasts of people who not only have good content but can share that content quite effectively, and that often tends to be authors of popular science books rather than researchers of PhDs. So that's a shame, but that is something. The other one for me is my show is heavily edited and it's a narrative-based discussion, and I have found, even on podcasting, which is a medium where people just tune in and they will leave that show running. They don't click away. There's nothing else. When you're in the car and you put on a podcast, it's very hard to stop listening to that podcast. When you go on your phone and view a TikTok video, it's very unlikely that you'll watch the whole video. So podcasting is a very different medium. And yet still, I find that you want to keep people's attention. You want to value people's time. So that it will involve, for example, never cutting cutting between different conversations and snippets of information fairly quickly. So if somebody's made a good point, I won't play the full recording of them making that point for 5 minutes. I'll trim that down to 1 minute and then we'll move on to something else. That point's been made. The listeners understand it. So keeping people's attention by editing the show is another thing that I try.
And you keep them quite short too, right? Like they're all around 25, 30 minutes, right? Is that you found that's the right length to keep that engagement up and keep it punchy? And
yeah, I think any longer, and as a creative show, it becomes impossible for sort of my mind to understand it all. It turns into something so much bigger.
One of the shows you did was on, I forget what the title was, but it was basically about how to have creative ideas. And you set up a premise of, is it easier just to hang back and let a creative idea form and come to you? Or should you put some hard graft into it and really kind of focus on bashing out the creative idea? And that's how you set it up in the beginning of the podcast. And I found that fascinating. We had a chap called Al Mary on from last season, who's got a shop called Flower Shop, a creative agency called Flower Shop, and his whole thing was being ruthless with the just bashing away night and day at the creative idea and just being relentless. He was also a marathon runner, and he's a dour kind of Scot and lovely bloke. But it was all just ruthless. And I listened to you at that podcast at the same time I'd listened to Al Mary's kind of perspective on it, and I was kind of interested in what the answers were. But and I loved the way you framed it. You said most people would think 50-50. Some people think it's a hard slog. Some people 90%. Some people think it's it's just let the idea come to you and don't force it. But in actual fact, in the creative process, about 90% of ideas came from one form than the other. And I don't know if I'll give it away as to which one. It doesn't matter too much what the answer is, because I wouldn't mind people going onto your podcast to try to find it out, because I think it's a really beautiful, interesting kind of thing. Your creative process for coming up with a podcast, what is it? Is it hard graft, or do you just wait and get inspiration? How do you do it?
You're constantly redefining it, but the basis of it is hard work. Like, I feel very passionate about every author I interview. I need to have properly read the book, made diligent notes, and be emailing them in advance saying, this is what I want to talk about that's in your book. The creative process that I'm going through at the moment, the way I'm defining it is, this sounds really LinkedIn guru cliche, so I apologize in advance, but I'm really liking this idea of discipline, this idea that well, I'm going to give the spoiler for the study you were talking about earlier, Adam. But
That's
the
right.
answer is that 90% of people, 90% of the best ideas come out of hard graft. The best ideas, the best solutions to things do not come when you're going for a walk through the park and suddenly it hits you, oh, I should do this, or oh, this is the solution. It comes from actually doing the thing. That's where you come up with solutions. If you want to write a better book, it's much better to just keep writing that book, put in the hours. And then when you read like all of these, Stephen King on writing, for example, you realize that these writers know all of this already. They do all of these things because there's no other way to do it. You can't write a book by walking through parks constantly and have the occasional idea which you write down as a line and then eventually you'll have a book. It requires hard graft. So my creative process at the moment is this idea of discipline, that if I can stay disciplined, if I can really focus on something, if I can keep working towards it, and the relief actually with this insight that creativity comes from hard graft is I used to naively think that my creative juices would run out, and that if I spend more than an hour working on something, I'll eventually get to the point where I'll be out of ideas and nothing else will come. But what these studies show, so these studies do interesting things like they ask people to come up with as many creative uses for a newspaper as possible. It's kind of a silly way to measure creativity, but it is a measure. They can do it. And what they show is you give people 3 minutes to do it and they think they've come up with all of the different ideas they have. If you give them another 10 minutes, they come up with just as many. And those ideas are rated as more creative by independent observers, the ones that they come up with later. They did another study with stand-up comedians where they say, come up with as many jokes as you can within 3 minutes. And then they wait a bit and they say, well, now come up with another batch of jokes and you have 10 minutes this time. And again, those jokes that took more time, more effort to create were rated as funnier by an independent group of people. And so your creative juices don't seem to run out. It's more like you're a motor that's getting started. And once you're getting started, once you're rolling, these things start coming to you more easily. And it doesn't surprise me that the person you had on your show is a marathon runner and he understood this, or she understood this. The person who told me about this is Adam Alter, and he runs a lot as well. I think runners get this because runners, especially long distance runners, it's all about finding that rhythm. You do not win, or you can't get a good time in a half marathon or a marathon within the first hour. It's all about finding rhythm and putting in the effort, and then eventually it comes to you. Eventually, about an hour and a half into a marathon, you might really feel that rhythm and you might be able to push through, and that's where the good stuff comes. And I think the same is true of creativity. You need to get up and running first. You need to have that discipline, and then creative inspiration comes to you.
So coming back to the discipline, does that mean a particular cadence where you research on a Monday, you write on a Tuesday, you record on a Wednesday? Like, are you really disciplined with the cadence of how you're doing it as well?
I try to be. I try to keep different days for different parts of the business. It's hard though. I think for me, it's just like at the moment, it's being at the desk at 7 a.m. every morning is one of these discipline things, and not leaving until the work's done at the end of the day, just purely giving myself more time. I think there's a whole problem with a generation of people around my age, probably a little bit younger, of like, we are just so incredibly distracted. And it's so easy for us to have our attention redirected. And so discipline looks like actively blocking the majority of the internet on my computer in order to ensure that I work on the thing I need to work, actively blocking the majority of apps on my phone in order to ensure I don't get distracted. And being distracted is not a problem. It's fine if you lose focus. The problem is when that distraction turns into you're going down a completely different avenue, and suddenly you're learning about how cats clean themselves in the Antarctic, or what this person said to the other person outside Wetherspoons to cause them to punch them. Like, suddenly you're just learning about something else. That's not a distraction. That's just you're suddenly taking in information that's irrelevant. So discipline for me is, it's about almost sensory deprivation. Essentially, like, only let me focus on the thing I have to focus on.
Is that completing an idea once you have an idea? How do you create the idea in the first place?
Some business leaders will gloat about not reading books. They say, I don't need to read books. I think they're a waste of time. Books are, self-help books or popular science books or books written by researchers or even fiction books. They're a waste of time. It's a really slow medium to get information, and it's useless. I couldn't disagree more. I would say the vast majority of the ideas I have come from reading. Mostly reading non-fiction, but and mostly reading your book, of course, Adam.
And how often do you read? So how much do you read, Phil? Like, what are we talking? How many hours a day?
I read around 50 books last year. So what is that? About one a week. And the majority, well, actually, it's not true. About half would be purely related to the business. So I'm reading the books from the authors. I'm reading other books that are sort of notorious within the field that I should be aware of. And the difference with me is like, God, that sounds bragging. What I do when I try and read is I have an app on my phone called Highlighted. And every time I find something interesting, and my phone needs to be on basically airplane mode as well. This is because otherwise I'll look at my phone and I'll get distracted. So I block everything on my phone except this app Highlighted. And then when I find a page that's interesting, I'll take a picture of it on Highlighted, write a little note, say if it links to any behavioural science principles, and then it also records the page it was on, for example. And then I eventually have this huge database of all of these fascinating things I've stumbled upon in books. And always there'll be a little insight in a book which I'll say, oh, that'll make a great newsletter. Or, wow, this story about this Satanist who's inspired the Satanic Panic, that will create a great podcast episode. Or this story about the Atkins diet and why it was so successful due to black and white thinking, that'll make a great YouTube episode. All of my inspiration, I think, comes from reading.
I'm reading a book at the moment my wife gave me, and it's the latest book from a psychiatrist called Irvin Yalom. I don't know if either of you guys...
No, Adam.
And the book's called Hour of a Heart, Connecting in the Here and Now. And Irvin is 93, and he's got Alzheimer's. And so he can only see patients once.
Oh, it's like 50 First Dates.
Kind of. And so because he can only see people for an hour, he just does the whole therapeutic session in an hour and says, right, I'm going to help this person as much as I can in this hour because that's all I've got to give them. And it's all about processing what's happening in the here and now and then generalizing out from that. And the assumption being people operate in patterns of behavior. So if I can dissect what's happening right here in this moment, in this relationship between us, and I can unpack that and play that back to the patient, then the patient can learn from that, get an insight from that, and see how they kind of navigate in the world. I haven't been touched by a book like this for 30 years or something. It's just absolutely fascinating. And I kind of just wanted to share that little moment on that book just because it's so bloody amazing. So I'll just recommend anyone to read it. One of the things we've got here, Phil, is something called the pub test, where we take a piece of your work.
Which will pass no behavioural science principles whatsoever, but we still do it,
We still do it,
yeah.
And it gives us some kind of fodder to chew off. And so what we've done is we've taken one of your podcasts and we've played the introduction to it to a few people at the pub to see what they think.
It's a good test for curiosity.
It is a good test for curiosity.
Yeah.
And the actual one we chose is the one we spoke about before about creative ideas and so forth. And so this is what the people in the pub thought of your podcast.
The pub test is brought to you by Deely, the insights platform where ideas go to grow.
Yeah, I do find this podcast interesting. I definitely think creativity is one of those things that's kind of very intangible, very aloof, very hard to kind of pin down. So I'm definitely very interested in like the behavioural science behind it.
Yeah, it is interesting, definitely.
Is really interesting.
Definitely would listen to more to this podcast. It sounds really up my alley. Definitely hooked me with the blurb about Bob Dylan's songwriting as well too, because, I mean, fantastic, of course.
Depends on the topic.
I think Phil's a really good host because he's clear, succinct, and doesn't over-dramatise.
What do I think about a podcast all about human behavioural science and human behaviour? Well, I'm a big fan of people like Rory Sutherland, so I think behavioural science it's actually really, really fascinating because more often than not you can learn things that seem counterintuitive and leverage them for whether it's your creative output or it's your, business goals?
It's definitely useful. I think it's something that is less explored and should be more.
Pretty easy to listen to.
Love Phill. Great voice. As far as podcasting voices go, he's got a great voice. Very smooth.
Great level of enthusiasm. He seems to have a good rapport with the guests too.
Does this pass the pub test? Most definitely does pass the pub test.
Yep, I'd probably share it to someone, yeah.
And yeah, it does pass the pub test.
That was the most boring one of those we've ever done, because I've never heard them rave like that
It was
about
a very
anything.
positive pub test, wasn't it?
That was amazing. So I don't think that's ever happened before, but they love it. One of the questions was, what do you think of Phill as a host? So I don't know if I don't assume they've all listened to your podcast and know you personally, but just they may have just been playing that back. There's not a lot of surprises there, though, right? One of the things that you've got is you're unpacking what makes humans human and why we make decisions, and people are kind of interested in that, right?
Yeah, I would say that was quite surprising. That was very nice. It doesn't often feel that way when you're creating things, that everyone is unanimously positive. Like, I went viral on TikTok last year. I'm now not on TikTok because I just hate it so much. But there was a period where I thought, okay, everyone needs to go on TikTok and I need to understand it. And like you said at the start, like I practice what I preach and I want to learn these and test things out on TikTok. So I was recording all these videos of myself giving intros to my show, being really curiosity inspiring, and then encouraging people to go and listen. And one of these videos got over, I think it was 1 million point something views, loads and loads of views. So much so that like my sister's boyfriend was messaging me saying, "You've just come up on my TikTok, what the fuck?" And like old school friends who I hadn't spoken to in 10 years were like, "I've just seen you," and like, "What are you doing?" Like, they didn't even know I'm doing a podcast. So like, it's that sort of level. And I thought, wow, here we go. This is it, big time. I'll be on Dragon's Den soon. I'll be starting my own consultancy. This is it. I've hit the big time. And it basically drove no listeners. This is the first thing that's interesting. Basically drove no listeners to the podcast because the TikTok want people on TikTok. They don't want people leaving TikTok. So all these people who say you just need to go viral on TikTok to get fame, it's BS. Like, it's really hard to translate that into anything meaningful. The other thing is, the only reason it becomes popular is because there's a bit of spiciness. So I was in Thailand at the time, and being the Brit I am, I had a bit of a burnt face, a bit of a red nose. So my nose is protrudes a little bit. And it was a bit red. The number one comment, and this had tens of thousands of likes, the number one comment on TikTok is, "Why am I listening to this red-nosed wanker?" The second comment on TikTok was like, "Oh, here we go. Rudolph is giving us advice again." I was just like, oh, this is me sinking 8 hours into creating this really interesting show. I don't know what the show was about now, but it was like, and I'm just talking about, I think it was a show I did with Chris Voss. So a really good guest about negotiations. Why am I listening to this red-nosed wanker? So often it's really nice to hear that pub test, because that really is my benchmark in my head, that most people who see me, who listen to me, think, why am I listening to this red-nosed wanker? That's what I imagine most people hear and think when they see me. So it's nice to get something which is a bit different.
Yeah, well, that is a pretty extraordinary. There's normally a bit of tension. There's normally a bit of give and take in that. So you may well have a whole bunch of fans.
New Aussie listeners. If you're looking for insights, don't do a pub test. Go to Ideally.
I thought we didn't believe in research.
We don't believe in bad research.
We don't believe in research. It takes forever. It's loads and loads of PowerPoint charts.
Well, because the speed of culture moves in hours, not weeks.
Yeah, so you need research to be fast. You need to be fluid. You need to be co-created. You need everybody to be able to get in on it and get the responses straight away.
100%. And with Ideally, they turn it around overnight with their fantastic digital platform.
You know what I really hate about research?
What's that?
I hate the fact that it takes forever. It's really expensive and clunky. And then it relies on some poor young sod to be speaking the bleeding obvious from the research really enthusiastically. Everyone gets bored and the insight gets lost.
I hate the stale sandwiches.
You're talking about the focus group.
Yeah. Ideally is an insights platform that lets you create with confidence. You can test ideas and innovations overnight and affordably. Visit goideally.com to find out how Ideally can unlock insights for your business. So one of the questions, as Adam said, was, what do you think of Phill as a host? But I have to ask you, Phill, what do you think of Adam as a guest? How was he when he came on the podcast? Was he, where do you rank him?
Yeah, Adam was great. Adam was great. I mean, Adam's. No, I have to say this, obviously. So take a pinch of salt. But Adam, Adam was that example of like, it's sometimes shit to get the researchers on because they just explained things in such a vanilla sense, whereas Adam actually explained things with spice. Louis Grenier, one of the other podcasters within the UK space, he talks about creating spicy content. And I think that's what Adam came on and did. You sort of need to be able to say things that are a little bit controversial. I mean, your book's got a controversial title as well, Adam. So it's like I always knew you understand what captures attention and creating a hook, and you did that on the show. And yeah, that was one of. There were some episodes which are a bit of a dream to just edit and put together, and that was one of them.
How was that for you, Adam?
That was equally awkward, but it was kind of self-soothing at the same time, and kind of felt good, even though it felt awkward.
He was dying to ask. I thought I'd ask for him.
Yeah. Excellent. So, as I said before, I do love people who are kind of, I feel like they're giving us good information, good content, useful kind of tidbits at the same time as being entertaining. And I think, obviously, I didn't mean to use the word tidbits there. I think
You're trying to be spicy?
No, I wasn't trying to be spicy. I think I'm also kind of slightly belittling what Phil's doing. But one of the things I'm an avid podcast listener, because everything I'm doing, I can't afford to just be entertained at the moment. I feel like I have to be entertained and learning at the same time. Because time and pressure is everything's so compressed. That's kind of in my mindset. So I can't just tune out. So I really enjoy podcasts that entertain and inform at the same time. I also really like the fact that you've been able to stay in this world and stay incredibly creative as well. Like as I said before, I find it refreshing to see that bounce back a little bit. And so I thank you for that. Phill, if we had to sum up, one of the things we do like to do is try to understand from our guests what their creative philosophy is and put it into a slogan that would then be on a black T-shirt that then we hope to send to said guest and give it to them in the mail.
With a handwritten note.
With a handwritten note under the proviso.
That's how we roll on this podcast.
Under the proviso, but if the said guest does actually receive this black T-shirt with their slogan on it, they will then wear it and post it online.
Are you applying behavioural science now to the black T-shirt?
Well, I'm also trying to manage expectations that if we don't get round to it, that's the reason why. And maybe also I'm trying to stall a little bit, because the question is to you, Phill, is if we were to send you said T-shirt and it did have your philosophy or your slogan on your approach to creativity on it, what would it say?
Oh, what a fantastic question. It would probably say, based on the nugget of information we gave earlier, about creativity becoming easier or flowing more freely when you put in the hard graft. Like, I'm imagining that marathon runner of like the success comes 3/4 of the way in, not in the first 5K. It'd probably be something like when it gets hard, it gets good. Something like that. But in reality, the best T-shirt...
Spicy.
That is a spicy T-shirt, Phill. Yeah, that will get you on TikTok. You'll be trending on TikTok wearing that.
Exactly. I think it should just say, I'm the red-nosed wanker. Because then everyone in the street will be like, oh, there he is. The red-nosed wanker. I remember that video. He went viral, didn't he?
Don't wear red sneakers. Have a red nose.
Yeah, all right. So when it gets hard, it gets good. And we'll try not to double entendre that and just try to keep it with the integrity that
was intended.
That was intended.
A bit more thinking.
Phill, thank you so much for sharing your insights. Really appreciate it, mate.
Thanks for coming on, Phill.
Thanks so much, guys. Thank you.
At Black T-Shirts, we like ads featuring supermodels. And the most supermodel is the Mutant X market mix model.
Picture this, if you will. A little computer with a little algorithm. And inside that algorithm is a market mix modeling program. That's Mutant X. Hello.
Or if you want to get serious about measuring effectiveness, talk to Mutant X. They're the world's leading SaaS provider of market mix modeling. Marketers, think of it as a growth co-pilot. Mutant X, make better decisions.
Lovely chap.
Yes, very articulate, very clever.
Do you want to know one of the issues I have in the world of behavioural sciences and applying it is remembering all the cognitive biases, all the available heuristics at the same time, and then being able to apply those. So I found he was able to just remember all of the stuff.
His ability to remember different studies and it's like, I love people who can always think of a joke that connects to the conversation you're having, right? As opposed to some rant, like, you know, they go, oh, that reminds me. He's like that with studies.
Yeah, that's a really good example.
He can really link them to the conversation and can just seem to just pluck them from thin air. But really impressive what he's built. I think you made the point, which is if you're going to have a podcast about behavioural science, instead of just talking about it, actually apply the behavioural science to your own podcast and your own business. So I think it's brilliant the way he does that.
Do you think we apply creativity to this podcast?
I mean, we certainly talk to really creative people, but maybe there is a way to make it more creative. I don't know. But if we were going to take Phil's sort of approach, then yeah, we would, wouldn't we?
I think there's I think so. For me, this podcast. If this is boring for the listener, please just tune out. But for me, this podcast...
Adam and I are having an existential crisis
here.
Yeah.
This podcast is about trying to understand and unpack the creative process and trying to do that for other people. So I think if we spent a whole lot of time doing that on our own podcast, I don't know how interesting that would be. Like, we don't have to unpack the creative process of black T-shirts. We just need to get other people to unpack theirs. So I don't think it applies.
Maybe not, but maybe, I absolutely love that experiment that your creative partner Jim Ingram did, where they got the BMX bike, and they bought it off eBay for whatever it was, $20, and then they wrote, and it was a very functional eBay ad, right? And they bought it for $20, just said, BMX bike, red, bit of rust, still works, $20, and then they wrote a very creative ad, a very funny ad.
Yeah,
and
they
said
it wicked sticks. It had how many monos it had thrown, and
it's amazing.
It's skid marks everywhere. 200 meters of skid marks from the ball tires.
Yeah.
And then they resold it to see what the value of creativity was.
And it was
so
like
they applied
$150 or something. Which is
so an ROI of 400% on the creativity.
Yeah, I love that. So maybe that's interesting for us to think about. Like, are there certain opportunities to test creativity, prove creativity, like the little tests that Phil's always doing on his pod. Maybe we can think about some way of sort of something like that, a bit of a fun, creative test.
Yeah, okay.
Or not.
That makes me just want to say, we'll brief it in. But we should be the ones who are doing it.
You brief it and I'll approve it. That's how that'll go.
All right. Phil's great, charming, affable, super intelligent, and highly creative. And
I wish I was that well read.
I would just really encourage everyone to listen to his podcast. It's really, really good.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. God bless.